Welcome to the course of Wireless Sensor Network. This topic is the third part of our series regarding network security essentials. This is lecture number 19 and I'm your instructor Zeeshan Bangash. So previously we discussed during the first part some key concepts related to security and some essential requirements keeping in view the wireless nature of the network, that were confidentiality, availability, and integrity, which are of key importance for a wireless medium. Then we discussed some level of impact that of a security breach, that may be a low, a moderate, or a high. And then we discussed some challenges during the first part, and in the second part we discussed some attacks, some categories of attacks that were active attacks and passive attacks for a networks. And then we further discussed some scenarios of the attack, and we discussed eavesdropping attack, message replaying attacks, and different categories of attack. So in this part, which is the part number 3, we will further discuss some more concepts related to the wireless sensor network security. So let's move to the outlines of our today's discussion. So today we will be discussing about some security services and some security mechanisms, and then some models will be discussed, some security models, and at the end we will discuss some standards of security, and we will try to conclude our topic for network security essentials for wireless sensor network in our today's session. So let's move to the first agenda, that is the security service. So the role of security, or the role of security service, require a very challenging constraints. Note that both similarities and differences with the traditional documents, paper documents that includes have signatures and dates. They need some protection from disclosure, or they need protection from tampering a document or a physical destruction of a document. Similarly, the document authentication may be assured by notarized or witnessed, or it may be recorded or licensed in the presence of some witness. So these are some of the consideration, security service consideration in keeping in view the traditional paper document security mechanisms. Now, enhancing security of data processing systems and information transfers of an organizations, the security services are of very much need. They are basically important in order to counter security attacks, and we need to incorporate more than one security mechanisms to ensure the security of the overall organization from intruders. And we often replicates function that are normally associated with the physical document. For example, if on a physical document there is a mechanism of signature, so we try to have a digital signature mechanism. Similarly, the enveloping of a document to ensure its confidentiality is there's a parallel digital enveloping mechanisms. So we try to replicate functions that are associated with the physical documents. Just have signatures and dates, and need protection from disclosure, tampering, or destruction, or some third party witnessing or recording. Now, security services X.800. Now, security X.800 defines a security service as a service provider by a protocol layer of communicating open system that ensures adequate security of systems or the data to be transferred. Perhaps there is a clear definition in the RFC that will be discussed later on. So it's what is X.80? It's a service provided by a protocol layer of communication open system, and that ensures security of the system or security of the data that is to be transferred. So the RFC 2828 that provides the definition in detail that a processing or communicating uh, service that is provided by a system to give a specific kind of protection to the resources of the system. Security services implements the security policy, and they are also implemented by the security mechanism. So this is the bottom line. So it is the RFC 2828 clearly defines the security services as it provides give a specific kind of protection to the system resources. Now there are five security services categories that will be discussed. In fact, six categories there, and the total 14 specific services have been defined in the X.800, and there is always a degree of ambiguity as to the meaning of these terms. However, the broad services categories includes the first one is shown, that's the authentication, and authentication is concerned with assuring that a communication is authentic, and two specific authentications are defined in X.800, and one is the peer entity authentication that provides corroboration of the identity of peer entity in an association, and the second one is the data origin authentication, and that provides corroboration of the source of a data unit. So this is the first security service mechanisms or the mechanisms, that's the authentication. And the second one is the, so we have already discussed, second one is the access control, and it's basically the ability to limit and control the access to host system and access to the applications through some communication link. It basically is the prevention of unauthorized use of the resources. And the third thing is the confidentiality or the data confidentiality is the protection of the transmitted data from attacks, passive attacks particularly, and the protection of traffic flow from analysis, and it's basically meant for protection of data from unauthorized disclosures. And the fourth one is the data integrity that assures the messages are received as they are sent, with no insertion, with no modification, with no replay, no reordering, no duplication, or any loss. So it assures the data received is as as was sent by the authorized entity. And the other mechanism is the non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is the protection against denial of one of the parties in a communication. And the last one is the availability, is the property of a system or a resource that is being accessed and is and usable upon demand by an unauthorized system entity, and that is according to the performance specs for the system. So now security mechanisms, which are the specific meaning for implementing one or more security services. They are called the security mechanism, and these mechanisms span a wide range of technical components, but one aspect is that is in use is can be found easily in books termed as cryptographic techniques. These mechanisms are designed to detect or prevent or recover from security attacks, and there is no single mechanisms that will support all services required. So this is the key point. There are many security mechanisms. However, one particular element underlines many of the security mechanisms in use. For example, we discussed that cryptographic technique is one of the mechanisms, one of the security mechanism. Now, uh, the specific security mechanism are the protocol layer specific. Uh, the pervasive security mechanism are not layer specific. Uh, so specific security mechanisms, for example, the digital signature or the access control or the data integrity or the enchipment, authentication exchange, routing control, notarization, traffic pending, they are protocol layer specific mechanisms. And pervasive security mechanisms like security labels or the trusted functionality, event driven, security audit trial, security recovery, they are not protocol layer specific mechanisms. So this is something to be considered. Now, in considering the place of the encryption, it is useful to follow two models. The first is shown in the figure. Information being transferred from one party to another over a very insecure communication channel in the presence of some possible opponents or intruders. So the two parties who are principally in this transaction needs to cooperate for exchange to be taken place. They can use an appropriate security transform encryption algorithm with some suitable keys, and that keys may be or might be negotiated using the presence of some third party, and one through so these the exchange of that keys through some third party or some mechanisms to rebuild or refresh these keys is again a challenge and a security consideration. Now, a model of network security requires suitable algorithm for security transformation, then some generation of the information keys that is to be used by the algorithm, and the third thing is that how to share the secret information or that secret keys between the two parties, and then the protocol that enable the principal to use the transformation and secret information for a security service. So uh, in this figure that is concerned with controlled access to resources or the information on a system, and that is in the presence of some intruders who try to intercept the information or try to utilize the usage of the inappropriate resources. Here the appropriate controls are needed on the access within the system in order to provide some suitable security. So the security mechanisms that needs to cope with unwanted access that falls in two categories, and the first category is termed as the gatekeeper function. You can just see in the diagram, and this gatekeeper function includes some password based login procedures, and these procedures are designed to deny access to all but to the authorized users, and screening logic that is designed to detect and that is designed to reject worm viruses and such type of attacks. So once either an unwanted user or an unwanted software tries to gain access or has gained access, there is a second line of defense that comprise of variety of other controls or the internal controls that then again starts monitoring the activities and analyze the whatever data that or information that has been generated, and in an attempt that is to detect the presence of unwanted intruders. So there are a lot of um, alarms or alerts that has been generated, and then this data is analyzed, and on the base of that, abnormality in the system is observed. So some of the models for network access security that require, again, as we have discussed, that the selecting appropriate gatekeeper function in order to identify the users, and secondly the implementation of security controls, that is in order to ensure only authorized user access designated information or the resources. So a standard that is the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, have introduced has introduced standard like FIPS, Federal Information Processing Standard, and SIP. This is a special publication. Similarly, there is an ISOC, Internet Society, and it is basically home of Internet Engineering Task Force and Internet Architecture Board, and it's basically provide the RFCs, which we know that is request for comments. So here we discussed some security services, and we talked that these security services provided by a protocol layer of the communication open system, and they ensure security of the system or security of the data to be transferred, and they are defined in some RFCs. Like for example, we discussed about the RFC 2828, in which the security mechanism X.800 has been defined, and then we discussed some security services that are important, like we discussed about the authentication, that assuring that a communication is authentic. For example, in X.800, two authentication services like peer entity authentication and data origin authentication has been provided. Similarly, we discussed about the access control, that is to limit and control the access of the host system and applications, and we discussed about the confidentiality. It's basically the protection of the data to be transmitted. We talked about the integrity, which is again one of the security service that assures that the message, how it are received, are sent, and there is no duplication in the duplication of the message or modification or replay or loss. And we also discussed about the non-repudiation, which is again the protection of the sender or receiver against the denial of any one party in the communication for being part of the communication. And then we also discussed about the availability, which is a property of a system or a resource being accessible and usable upon demand by an authorized system entity, and as per the according to the performance specification of this system. So we discussed some X.800 security mechanisms, like those one that are protocol layer specific, and those like digital signature or access control, and those that are not protocol specific, like trusted functionality, security recovery, event detection. So we also discussed about that, and then we discussed some model of network security, in which a scenario has been discussed, and in which we discussed how the sender and the receiver communicate in the presence of a third party, and this third party is used for communicating keys or some secret information. And then we discussed some model of network security, and we also discussed about the model of network access security, in which an important function like the gatekeeper function, we discussed about that thing, that how much this gatekeeper function is important. And this is all from the topic of network security in wireless sensor networks. Some basic concepts we talked in we talked a lot about the different aspects of security in wireless sensor network, and this is the resource reference from which the resource has been taken, and you can just follow this thing. And thank you very much for patiently listening. Take care. Allah Hafiz.